Hello and welcome back. In our last lesson, we learned how to read Biblical Hebrew by working our way slowly through the last word of Psalm 150, Hallelujah. This time, as promised, we're going to learn all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in alphabetical order. But first, also as promised, this. I told you at the end of the last lesson that by the time we meet again, you should be able to recognize these 6 Hebrew words and recite them easily, as if you could read them and as if you knew what they meant. So, let's hear you. Shy? Then say them along with me. Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or. Vayehi Or. And they mean, Vayomer Elohim, and God said, Yehi Or, let there be light, Vayehi Or, and there was light. Beautiful. Now, the alphabet. We'll look at the vowel marks in detail next time. A quick public service announcement about the history of writing. Our alphabet, which is the Latin alphabet, our alphabet, the Greek alphabet, the Russian alphabet, they all look a lot alike. That's because the alphabet was only invented once, but it developed into many different forms. The Paleo-Hebrew alphabet and the Aramaic alphabet that Hebrew is now written in are also related to all those alphabets, including the alphabet that we use for English today, meaning that many, not all, but many of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet occur in the same order and stand for the same sounds as the letters we all learned as kids. And here is the Hebrew alphabet in alphabetical order. This is Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, the first letter of El, God. This is a silent letter. In the biblical period, this letter was probably pronounced as something called a glottal stop, a little bit like the sound in the middle of the word Latin. Notice that we don't say Latin, we say Latin. Nowadays, Aleph is not pronounced at all. We're going to learn how to pronounce Biblical Hebrew the same way that modern Hebrew is pronounced. If you're a fluent speaker of Arabic, you might be able to pronounce Biblical Hebrew in a somewhat more authentic way, but if you aren't, you probably can't even make most of the sounds the way they were made 3,000 years ago. Since the Hebrew text of the Bible was written over a period of 1,000 years, it's a good bet that the last writers in the Bible did not pronounce the language the same way the earliest writers did. We're using a later version of the alphabet, and we're going to use the easier later pronunciation too. We're going to encounter a number of letters that nowadays sound alike. I'll try to explain how they might once have sounded. For now, you need to know this. With one exception, every syllable in written Hebrew begins with a consonant. So if the first thing you hear or say is a vowel, the first thing you'll see or write will be one of the 2 consonants that nowadays are silent. Aleph is one of them. Next, Bet. Now you know why it's called the alphabet. Alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet, followed by Beta. Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is followed by Bet. This letter can have 2 different sounds depending on whether or not it's marked with a dot, like this. This dot is called a dagesh. We will learn much more about the dagesh next time. A bet with the dagesh is pronounced like our letter B. A bet without a dagesh is pronounced like our letter V. So, Bavel, Babylon. The Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 is really, you guessed it, Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babylon. Let's go on. In English, we're used to ABC, but in the old days, it was Greek Alpha, Beta, Gamma. Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Makes the sound of our G, Gimel does, but always a hard G, G, never a soft G, J. That's just not a Hebrew sound. Next, back in English order, Dalet, D. You can remember the 3 letters after Aleph by learning this word, beged, an article of clothing. Now, every word in the Bible has a punctuation/accent mark. The majority of Hebrew words are accented on the last syllable, but there's a sizable minority that have the accent elsewhere. When you don't see an accent mark, assume the accent is on the last syllable. When the accent is elsewhere, as it is in this word, I'll put an accent mark on the word, like the one you see here, which is not one of the accents you see in the Bible. Words with a pair of vowels, like beged, especially like to put the accent on the first syllable, beged. All right, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Hey, the first letter we learned, the first and last letter of Hallelujah. It's our letter H. Vav comes next. It was probably pronounced more like a W in biblical times. That's why it can be used to indicate the vowels O and U, as we saw in Hallelujah. Much more on that next time. When it's a consonant, in the pronunciation we use nowadays, it's pronounced as if it were the letter V. After Vav comes Zayin, Z. You can learn the word Zahav, gold. Next in order are 2 letters that rhyme, Chet and Tet. Tet is a T sound. Chet is a guttural sound like the CH in Bach. If you sound like you're gargling, but you make the sound in your mouth, not in your throat, that's close enough for folk music. And the 10th letter of the alphabet is Yud. You remember that it was the Y sound in our word hallelujah, but like Vav, it's also used as a vowel indicator. In the word Yehi of Yehi-or, we see the first Yud being used as a consonant and the second Yud as a vowel. Again, we'll talk more about this next time. And those are the first 10 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, and Yud. One more time. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. Now, say them with me, please. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. And Hebrew also uses these letters as shorthand for numbers. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4, He is 5, Vav is 6, Zayin is 7, Chet is 8, Tet is 9, and Yud is 10. We said that Yud is the equivalent of our consonant Y, but it's also used to mark the vowel that we spell with the letter I. And remember that it's transliterated in the word hallelujah with the letter J. That means, alphabetically, Yud puts us back on track with the Latin alphabet that we all know, where I and J are the 9th and 10th letters of the alphabet. And what comes next? I, J, K. The Hebrew K is Kaf. Like Bet, this is a letter that's pronounced differently depending on whether or not there is a dagesh in the letter. With a dagesh, Kaf is pronounced like K. Without a dagesh, it's the same sound as Het, a guttural ch sound. You can remember it by learning the word kacha, thus. Now, Kaf is the first of 5 Hebrew letters that have different forms when they occur at the end of a word. You see how the bottom of the Kaf curves on toward the left so you can keep writing, but at the end of a word it doesn't curve, it just continues straight down, like this. Enoch's name has a final kaf in Hebrew, Chanoch. And what comes after K? LMNOP, QRST. Let's look at them now. First, Lamed. You remember this from Hallelujah. It's our letter L. It's the only Hebrew letter that sticks up above the line. And if you look at the vertical part that sticks up and then at the horizontal stroke it connects to, you realize you're looking at our letter L. I'll say it again. This is our same alphabet, even if many of the letters underwent rotation and other transformations so that the resemblance isn't obvious any longer. But this one is. This one is L, and you can kind of recognize it, and you can certainly remember it from the word hallelujah. Next up, Mem, M, simple. This is also one of the 5 letters with a special form when it's the last letter of a word. You can learn to recognize both forms of this letter by learning the word mayim, water. You may have heard of the actress who has that word as her name, Mayim Bialik. Apparently she's also a neuroscientist. I don't know how she got that name, but Mayim is the Hebrew word for water, a good word to learn. Begins with a regular mem, ends with a final mem. Because it's accented on that first syllable, you see that accent mark that I'm showing you, the non-standard accent. The combination sound ayi is another pattern where the accent doesn't fall on the last syllable, but on the previous one, like eh. What comes after M? N. And what comes after mem? Nun. It also has a final form, and the name of the letter happens to be the name of the father of the biblical character Joshua, who is called in the Bible Joshua, son of Nun. As you can see, the final Nun, like the final Kaf, simply continues down instead of turning left. We have 2 more final forms of letters coming up, and they will also do the same thing, continue straight down instead of turning left to continue the word. So after Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, and Yud, we've now learned Kaf, Lamed, Mem, and Nun. If you look back at these 14 letters, only 8 more to go, if you look back at these 14 letters, you'll notice that some, like Aleph and Bet, essentially fill up a block that's the shape of a square, but others, like Gimel and Vav, are only half as wide. One letter, Lamed, extends up above the line. 4 of the final letters and 1 other letter still to come extend below the line. Our next letter, Samech, is tricky. It's in the place of O in our alphabet, and it even looks like an O, but it's nothing of the kind. It also looks like a Greek sigma, and that's what it really is, an S sound. Samech is S. After Samech comes Ayin. This is the other letter matching Aleph that's usually not pronounced today. So when you see an Ayin, just pronounce the vowel underneath it. One common word that starts with Ayin is Eved, a slave. What did Ayin sound like in the old days? That's a little bit of a trick question. Jews from Arabic-speaking countries make a kind of sound in their throat, something like Ayin. But in ancient Hebrew, as in Arabic today, there were 2 different Ayin sounds, an Ayin and a Glayin. Excuse my mispronunciation. Our Hebrew Ayin represents both of those sounds. And the way we know this actually tells you something quite interesting about the history of the Bible. The prophet Amos spelled his name with an Ayin, and we call him Amos. We don't pronounce the Ayin, we just go right to the vowel sound. But Amorah, also starting with Ayin, is Gomorrah, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. Since both these names start with the same letter, why is it silent in the English name of Amos, but a G in the English name Gomorrah? The answer is that our English names for biblical people and places come from transliterations in the Greek version of the Bible, the Septuagint. And the Greek translators heard Amos with no consonant at the beginning, but they heard Gomorrah with a G sound. That means that even though written Hebrew used just one letter, ayin, for both those sounds, people kept pronouncing the two original ayins differently. It's very hard for English speakers to reproduce either of those sounds. You just heard my own pitiful attempt at it. And in words that aren't proper names, there's no clue whatsoever to tell us which sound to use. So we're going to treat ayin as a silent consonant, as Israelis generally do. Just don't be surprised when you see an ayin at the beginning of a name that in English starts with a G. Pei is our P sound when it has a dagesh, and F when it doesn't. That may seem a bit strange, but if you think about PH as in Philadelphia, it will probably seem a lot less strange. This is also letter number 4 that has a different form when it occurs at the end of a word. And you can remember that by learning the biblical name Yosef. Do you recognize it? Give it a minute's thought if you don't. Yes, Yosef is Joseph. There's one more letter jumping in here that we don't have in English at all, Tzadi. It's the last of our letters with a special form for when it occurs at the end of a word. Not hard to pronounce. You say it like the combination TS in English. Don't be fooled. You will often see it transliterated into English as a Z, but in Hebrew it's TS, like the Z in pizza. So when you read at the beginning of the book of Job that there was once a man in the land of Uz, in Hebrew the name of that land was Utz. Ayin, Vav marking the U vowel, and final Tzadi. You can see both the regular form and the final form of Tzadi in Tzitz, the frontlet that the high priest was supposed to wear, kind of a diadem or a tiara with God's name on it. Let's pause to review. We started out with Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, and Yud. Remember that those are also shorthand for numbers. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and so on up to Yud equals 10. Now we have Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Pei, and Tzadi. Say them along with me, please. K-L-M-N-O-P, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Pei, Tzadi. They can be used as numerals too. Yud is 10, but we don't need Kaf to be 11. We can make that by combining Yud and Aleph. So these are the next higher numbers in the tens column. Kaf equals 20, Lamed equals 30, Mem equals 40, Nun equals 50, Samach equals 60, Ayin 70, Pei is 80, Tzadi is 90. Many years ago, there was a novel called The Last of the Just, based on the Jewish tradition that God only keeps the world in existence for the sake of 36 righteous people. They're all anonymous. Lamed equals 30, Vav equals 6. So these people are called the Lamed Vavniks. And now we're back on track with our alphabet to finish the Hebrew alphabet with the equivalents of QRST. Kuf, as you can see if you look at it carefully, is our letter Q. It's the one Hebrew letter other than a final form that goes below the line. That's the tail of the Q. Nowadays it's pronounced just like a letter K, just like a kaf with a dagesh. If you've ever wondered why Iraq is spelled with a Q at the end instead of a K, remember that Iraq is an Arabic-speaking country. Arabic is the other Semitic language that's alive and kicking today, and in Arabic, Iraq is spelled with the equivalent of Hebrew, kuf, not kaf, Q, not K. And kuf stands for 100. Resh is our letter R. Resh equals 200. My own Resh will once in a while slip out of an American-sounding accent to something else, but don't stress out about how to pronounce Resh. Just think of it as R and say it however you want. In general, my Hebrew accent is somewhere in between Israeli and American. I'll try to speak clearly enough so that you can understand what I'm trying to say. Next comes Shin, or should I say Sin. This is the 21st of Hebrew's 22 letters, and it's a twofer, 2 letters in one. We've seen 3 letters up to now that are pronounced differently when they have a dagash in them: bet, B or V, kaf, K or ch, and pei, P or F. But that's just a matter of pronunciation. Putting a dagash in a letter does not change the meaning of the word in any way, even if it changes the way you pronounce the sound. But shin and sin are different. Shin, with a dot at the upper right of the letter, is sh. And sin, with a dot at the upper left, is an S sound. Nowadays it's pronounced just like a samach. Early in the history of the language, shin and sin were 2 completely different consonants, and they really still are, except the same symbol represents both of them. For now, just remember that shin with the dot at upper right is sh, but sin is sinister with a dot at the upper left. Sorry, southpaws. And that is S. When it's used as a numeral, it's printed without a dot. We still call it shin because we have to call it something, and it equals 300. Finally, taf is T, 400. Q-R-S-T, kuf, resh, shin, taf. Like tau in Greek, T. And that's the Hebrew alphabet. And you do have to learn the alphabet in alphabetical order. Why? Not just to be able to count, but to be able to look words up in the dictionary. So here's a little song you can learn. It started out being the same as our alphabet song, but somewhere along the way it took a detour and didn't quite get home. But here it is. Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Kaf, and Lamed, Mem, and Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei, Tzadi, Kuf, Resh, and Taf. Learn them all today. Now, one more look at the alphabet to focus on look-alike letters. Every alphabet has look-alike letters. We have them in English. There's a reason we say mind your P's and Q's, because when you're first learning to read or when you're setting type, you have to remember that P goes this way and Q goes that way. The same thing goes when you are beginning to read Hebrew for the first time. So let me point out some of the tiny differences that will soon be obvious to you, but might be worth a closer look right now. Notice how Bet, a B or a V, has a little tail sticking out at the back. Kaf, K or Ch, is rounded and has no tail. Pei, shaped like Kaf, but with this little tongue sticking into the letter. Peh is the Hebrew word for mouth. This is my peh. And final Kaf, Kaf Sofit, and final Pei, Pei Sofit, which always sounds like an F, both go straight down. Again, Kaf is empty, Pei has that little tongue. One more difference is that when Kaf ends a word, final Kaf always is printed with a vowel mark inside it. If there's no vowel sound in there, they'll print a shva. Here's Enoch again, Chanoch. Gimel and Nun, both only half as wide as a letter block, but Gimel splits open at the bottom. Dalet is made of two lines, squarish and sticking out a bit on the upper right. Resh is rounded with nothing sticking out. Hey, just like Dalet, but with a little line almost but not quite filling the gap on the left side. Guttural Het has no gap. Both legs of Het connect to the roof at the top. And Taf, all the way at the end of the alphabet, has a little foot sticking out to the left. Vav and Zayin are both narrow letters. The top of Vav is straight, and the leg comes straight down from the right side. The top of a Zayin is tilted, and the leg comes down from the middle, and it's a little bit wiggly. Not piggly wiggly, just wiggly. Mem Sofit, final mem. Mem, when it's in the last position in the word, is squared off. Samach is rounded. If you think you're looking at a final mem, but it's not at the end of the word, it's a samach. Silent ayin, kind of a hockey stick with a line coming down to meet the middle of the blade. Tzadi, that TS sound, really an acute angle with a little line coming down to meet the top of the slanted line from above, right in the middle of the block. And finally, Yud, Vav, and final Nun. Yud, too short to reach the line. Final Nun, too long, but Vav, just right. It's actually also important to be able to distinguish the letters that sound alike, but we'll talk about that next time, when we're also going to learn the vowels systematically. We've already seen a few of them, and if you look while you listen, you'll start to recognize some of the others. For right now, we're going to learn some more Bible, the Vayomer Elohim way. Let's have a look at Genesis 1:5. Vayikra Elohim laor yom, velachoshech kara laila. See that little wishbone under the word laila? Laila means night. That punctuation mark is called an etnachta, and it divides almost every biblical verse into two parts, A and B. I'm sure you recognize Elohim and Or, but for now we're just going to learn verse 5b. Vayihi erev, vayihi voker, yom echad. You remember Vayihi from Vayihi Or, and there was light, but this is Vayihi erev, and there was evening. Vayihi voker, and there was morning. Yom echad, yom is a day, echad is one. The word for morning by itself is boker, but in this verse, there's no dagesh in the bet. We'll talk about why next time, but if there's no dagesh, I say V instead of B. Vayihi voker, and there was morning. And now another Numbers 22 challenge for you. Not a word search this time, but a letter search. And it's simple. Find every consonant in the Hebrew alphabet, all 22 of them, plus the 5 final forms. Then you'll be desperate for some more vowels, and we'll learn those next time.